Okay.
Guys, thanks for joining us again today. Yesterday, if you were around yesterday, we were thinking about Jesus being put on trial. So at the end of his life, Jesus ends up dying on a cross, and we're spending these lunch times thinking, why? What happened? How is it that Jesus came to a point of ending up being executed on a cross? Yesterday, we were thinking about the trial of Jesus, and today we're going to think about what happened next. But before we get to that, let me ask you a question. If you could have any superpower, what would you go for? You can choose any. So this is a rhetorical question. You don't have to answer out loud. But if you could have a superpower, I wonder what you would choose. Um, I would definitely choose to be able to fly. That is for a long time has been kind of one of those little dreams that I've had of being able to fly. But it's a weird thing, isn't it? How all of us probably have at some point in our lives thought, "I'd love this superpower. I'd love to be able to do this." Because we live in a culture and a world that loves heroes, that loves power, that loves those who are strong. Um, and we sort of have a slight obsession with heroes, and an obsession with those who we perceive to be the strong ones. And you see it in little kids, right? As they grow up, they develop a sense of wanting to be strong and wanting to be seen to be strong. And so we probably all had those conversations with like a 3-year old who comes running up and says, "Look at my muscles! Look how strong I am!" And whenever a kid says that to us, we always say the same thing, right? I guarantee you say the same thing. You say, "Wow, that's amazing! You're so strong," even though the reality is there's nothing there and they're very weak. And sometimes I wonder if we should be a little bit more honest with children. Actually, that's pathetic. Your muscles are pathetic. You're very weak. Hey, look, let me arm wrestle you and show you how much stronger than you I am. But we don't do that because we want to build kids up, right? We like kids. So we want the kids to feel like they're strong. And so we aspire to be strong. And our kids are growing up in a culture that tells us that we're supposed to be strong and we're supposed to be independent. And so we have the world's strongest man competition, that bizarre sporting event where people lift boulders and pull trains with their teeth in order to demonstrate their great strength. And it's always struck me as interesting that we don't have the world's weakest man competition. I mean, that would be a great event, right? I mean, can you imagine that? Who's the weakest? Can you pull this Brio train with your teeth? No, it's too heavy. But we don't celebrate weakness. In fact, we hide away from weakness. We want to be strong. And so we live in a world where weakness really is avoided. And we don't like to be shown up to be weak. So we tend to find ways to um, avoid situations where we might be exposed. So I've discovered over the years that much as I love the thought of being able to surf, for example, surfing's not my thing. And if I try and surf, I look stupid. And so I've discovered that the best way is just to not try. And that way, people don't look at me as if I'm pathetic and feel sorry for me. And that's a stupid example, but for most of us, that kind of thinking operates a lot in the way that we go about life. We try to avoid situations where our weakness might be exposed. But at quite a serious level, I guess for most of us, we've experienced those moments when we just feel really weak. And we sort of feel like we're a bit of a mess. And we feel like we're not as impressive as other people. We look at other people and they just seem so strong and they seem so up together. And we wish that we could be like that. And we try and project an image of strength when actually inside we feel really, really weak. Well, what we're going to do as we look at this next section about Jesus is we're going to see something which flips our thinking upside down. Um, because we're going to see that in Jesus, we watch him in a moment of sheer weakness, That's what we're going to see. And I really want you to look at this and to see this, because there's going to be something very, very beautiful. If you've ever experienced weakness, if you've ever experienced that feeling of feeling rubbish and inferior, I want to show you something very beautiful about Jesus that I hope will surprise you and get you thinking and asking questions. So we're going to look at what happened after Jesus' trial. I'm going to read you some of this. I haven't got the words on the screen today, so just have to listen. But try and picture in your head the words that I'm reading. Try and imagine what's going on. So this is what happens after Jesus has been on trial and they've said, right, we're going to crucify him. We're told this: the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. That's probably about 100 soldiers, right? So a big crowd of Roman soldiers. They put a purple robe on Jesus. Then they twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spat on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him, and when they'd mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. Those words come from Mark's Gospel. Mark is an eyewitness account of the life of Jesus. And it's a difficult scene to look at, isn't it? If you really picture it, if you imagine trying to be there, that would be difficult to watch, wouldn't it? I mean, it's bad enough watching two people fight each other, like in UFC or kind of one of those fights where there's a vicious fighting against one another. But to watch 100 men beat up one weak man, that's just incredibly difficult to watch. It would be difficult to imagine a more pitiful picture of weakness. We're told about the physical mockery, the physical suffering as they ram a crown of thorns into the head of Jesus, piercing his skull and blood beginning to flow down his face, as they spit on him and as they hit him. And Jesus does nothing and doesn't fight back and is just weak. Can you see the weakness? That's surprising, right? That's shocking that Jesus would be that weak. But it goes on. Let me read you what happens next. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it, and they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." If the mockery of the 100 soldiers against Jesus was hard to watch, then this perhaps is even harder. As you see this battered figure of a man staggering along, this Roman cross being carried by Simon alongside this weak, frail man. And we're told that they crucified him. Crucifixion is one of the most brutal ways of execution that's ever been devised. And it was devised to humiliate. It was devised to expose just how weak the person was who was being crucified. It humiliated you. It was public. You were lifted up naked on a cross. And your arms were stretched out, nails driven through your hands and through your feet. It's gasping for breath. You see, when you're crucified, you suffer, you suffocate. That's how you die. Because with your arms stretched out, you cannot breathe properly. And you have to lift yourself up in order to be able to take a breath. But of course, to push yourself up, you have to push on your feet, which have nails driven through them. And so here is this picture of a man gasping for breath, humiliated, defeated, weak. And then listen to what happens next. Okay, we've seen the mockery, we've seen the crucifixion. And then verse 27, they crucified 2 rebels with him, one on his right, one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "So, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, come down from the cross and save yourself." In the same way, the chief priests and the teachers of the law mocked him among themselves. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. Let this Messiah, this King of Israel, come down now from the cross that we may see and believe." Those crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Do you hear it? They hurl insults at him. This is the scene. And it's not just that Jesus, in that moment, appears to be weak, pretends to be weak. He really is weak. This is absolute weakness. So here's the weird thing, right? This moment of weakness, this cross where Jesus dies, is the symbol that Christians take as the heart of what we say we believe. This moment of abject weakness and humiliation is the very thing that Christians say, that is precious and beautiful. How does that happen? How is it that this weakness is so celebrated and has become so precious? Well, the reason is because that moment of weakness, that moment of Jesus experiencing that suffering, was what it took to save people like us. You see, there are 2 types of weakness. And one type of weakness is a weakness that is to be despised, but another type of weakness is a weakness that is to be honored and cherished. You see, the weakness of a victim, the weakness of a powerless victim who cannot do anything, who cannot escape, that is a weakness that is to be pitied, a weakness that is tragic. And many people would see Jesus that way. "Oh, poor Jesus. This is really sad. This is really tragic." I remember at school, we watched the film about Jesus, Jesus of Nazareth, and we were watching it in RE. And I was a Christian, most of my class weren't. And this girl called Aisha was sitting next to me. And we were watching this film, and she was in floods of tears, just like sobbing when Jesus died on the cross. And I said to her, "Why are you crying?" And because I was kind of a heartless 15-year-old boy, I'm like, "What are you doing? Why are you crying? What's wrong with you?" And she said, "It's just so sad. Jesus was so lovely and they've killed him." And many people would see the weakness of Jesus as the weakness of a victim that we sort of have to feel sorry for. But there is another sort of weakness which is beautiful. And that is the weakness of a savior. That is the weakness of someone who is willing to embrace weakness in order to save others. And that is the weakness that is on display in Jesus. You see, when God looked at this world, the God who made this world, as he looked at this world and loved this world, he chose to act in a way that would humble human pride. You see, we love strength. Remember that. That's what we said at the start. Human beings, we want to be strong. We want to be powerful. We want to be impressive. We want people to look at our lives and go, "Oh, wow, you're awesome." like Incy Wincy Spider who climbed up the water spout. We want to climb up. We want to go up, up, up. And then down came the rain and washed poor Incy out. Oh no, poor Incy Wincy's been washed out of the spout. But it's okay because she's going to climb up the spout again, because going up and being strong is impressive. That's what we want to be. And God says, you know what? That's the problem with humanity. Humanity at its heart is proud and arrogant. Humanity at its heart says, I don't need anyone else. I'm strong. And so we live in a culture that says you've got to be independent. You've got to go for it on your own. Don't need other people. Don't be a needy person. You know, being needy, that's sad, right? We don't want to be needy. If you said to me, oh, that Ben bloke, what's he like? And I said, oh, he's a nice bloke. He's a bit needy. Right? No one's going to go, oh, that's lovely. You say, oh, dear, that's a bit sad. No, we value independence and being strong and being able to fix my problem. I don't need anyone else. And so God says, okay, I'm going to act to humble you. And so God chooses to save the world in an act of weakness, not in an act of power and strength. He chooses to save the world through a cross. And that's what makes this so stunning. So here is Jesus, who comes into the world, and he's got plenty of power. Right? In Mark's gospel, if you read back through Mark's gospel, he can calm the sea, and he can raise the dead, and he can open the eyes of the blind, and he can save, and he can feed the hungry. He's got plenty of power. And yet what he does with that power is, rather than serve himself, he goes to a cross to die. Do you know, when human beings get power, we tend to abuse it, right? When we get a bit of strength, when we get a bit of authority, when we get a bit of power, we tend to use it to our own advantage. I remember my first taste of real power was when I was the milk monitor at school, and I was in charge of giving out the bottles of milk back in the day when that's what we did at school. And it gave me a great sense of power because I was able to choose who got which bottle. And I was able to make sure that I and my friends got the bottles that were slightly fuller than all the other bottles. And it's funny how, isn't it? Even my little 5-year-old brain sort of took hold of power and was like, oh, yes, I could use this for my own advantage. And this is how humanity works. We try and use power for our own advantage. But here is Jesus, who comes with all power, and he chooses not to use that power to his own advantage, but instead to give up that power and to die in weakness in order to save people like us. That's what Jesus is all about. You see, when I look at the cross of Jesus, I see a man who is dying in weakness for me. He's doing it because I need saving. He's doing it because I need forgiveness. Because of my proud heart, my heart that wants to be independent, my heart that wants to be strong on its own. I need someone to save me. And that's what Jesus came to do. And he did it so that I can know God, so that I can be in relationship with God again. Okay, let me try and wrap this all up. Let me apply this in two ways. Let me suggest two things, both of which might sound slightly offensive, but I'm trying to provoke some questions and some thoughts and to try and get us thinking. Here's the first thing. If this is all true, if the way that God saves us is through weakness, if that's the way that God wants to relate to us, to humble us, the first big thing is that God is not impressed by you. Right? We need to understand God is not impressed as he looks at us. I realize that we may have all sorts of big questions about whether there even is a God. At the moment, just I'm trying to present to you the view of God as he is in the Bible. And it's very clear that as God, the God we meet in the Bible, as he looks at this world, he doesn't sit in heaven going, oh, what wonderful people, what fantastic people, aren't they awesome, aren't they great? No, actually, God is not impressed. In fact, God looks at us and is grieved because he sees our pride. He sees the way we abuse one another. He sees the way we get a bit of power and we use it to crush others. No, God is not impressed. In fact, God is angry by the way that we've acted. So let's get out of this idea that God is impressed by us and our religious acts. He's not. And the second thing that I want us to see is that God is not trying to impress us. So he's not impressed by us, nor is he trying to impress us. He didn't send his son to do a whole load of powerful things to impress us and show us how great he is. Instead, he sent his son to die in weakness on a cross to save us. So God doesn't want to impress you. He's not trying to win your approval. He's not trying to show you how great he is. Instead, he says, I sent my son to die for you because you desperately, desperately need it. I sent my son in weakness to die to save you. Let me finish with a story, and then we'll have some questions. I was at a wedding a few years ago, and it was one of those weddings. Well, weddings, the bit where they take all the photos and stuff, it just takes so long. It's so boring, and no one really wants to be in a photo anyway. And I was bored, and so I went off for a little walk around the graveyard of the church that we were in, and I was reading the gravestones. And one of them was to a 16-year-old boy called Frederick Dyson. And it sort of grabbed my attention, this gravestone. And he died on the 1st of January, 1869. And there was a little summary of how he died. He was only 16. And it said that on the 1st of January, 1869, a friend of his was drowning in a pool. And Frederick Dyson made this decision. He decided to dive into the pool and to save his friend. And his friend was saved, and Frederick Dyson died. And there's a little poem on the gravestone, a beautiful poem, that said this: Fame, give thy silver trumpet breath a hero to commend, who gave to the icy jaws of death himself to save a friend. You see, imagine that you were passing that day and you saw Frederick Dyson drowning, and you said, ha, pathetic, weak man drowning in a pool. Can't even swim. What's wrong with you? You go, whoa, that's horrific. He's chosen that place of weakness in order that his friend might live. And therefore, we should give Frederick Dyson the honor he deserves for his sacrifice. And so it is with Jesus. Jesus chose the place of weakness. Jesus chose the place of pain and suffering. Jesus chose the place of suffocation and blood and suffering in order to save us. And so rather than mock him, instead we should trust him, worship him, and realize that he did that for us. So God became weak so that we might be saved. So that's some thoughts on Jesus and his weakness. I'd love us to have some questions. Maybe there's all sorts of things you want to dig around in that, dig around in the way that our culture thinks about strength and weakness. Let's have a chat about that.